Alright, I want to talk about balancing equations. I do it a little bit differently than the book does, so hopefully you have read through most of the chapter at this point, or at least some of the balancing, so you know kind of what's happening. And then I want to talk about my tips for balancing. I want to remind you in these videos that anytime you can pause them, take notes, do a practice problem, come back and see what my answer was. Use the videos to help you. Don't just think you have to watch it straight through. If you know I'm going to do example 6.1 or another example, you can try it first and then pause the video while you try it and then come back and see if you got the same answer I did, or let me explain it to you. So please use these videos to help you out. Here's my thing about balancing. So first off, you should have read we balance equations because we need to fulfill the law of conservation of mass, which says matter can't be created or destroyed. So that means I need the same number of atoms on both sides of my chemical equation, in the reactants and the products. So if I have four carbon atoms in the reactants, I also have to have 4 in the products. Now they may be bonded differently, but they still have to be there. So that's why we balance reactions after we write them. Here's the thing that I don't like about the book. If you'll see on like page 230, page 231, even in page 228, they create charts for balancing equations. And that's great. If that has helped you learn how to balance them, please continue to do it. However, to me, the chart can, number one, be a little confusing because you're constantly changing things around. And so if you change something in the equation and then you forget to change it in the chart, then that can really mess you up. And second, the charts tend to take a really long time. And when we get into modules 7 and 8, you're going to need to balance equations pretty quickly because we're going to do math problems on top of the balanced equations. So if it's going to take you 10 or 15 minutes to balance an equation with the chart, you still have a math problem to do on top of that. So you really want to think about getting really proficient at balancing these equations. So for me, I just balance them. I balance them without the chart. I just balance them straight on the equation themselves. And I'll do a second video with examples, but here I want to give my tips for balancing equations. There's not really steps you go through. Everyone kind of has their own step procedure to do it. But these are some tips that will help the balancing go smoother if you'll follow them through your process. So tips for balancing. So my first tip is to balance one element at a time. Don't try to look at the equation as a whole. Just pick one. If there's a carbon atom, start with carbon. If it's sulfur, start with sulfur. But sodium, just pick one and start balancing it. How many sodiums on this side, how many on the other side, and make it work. Don't worry about, oh, this one's going to mess up this one. If you start thinking about it as a whole too quickly, you'll get bogged down. If you just take it one at a time and then come back and do it again, eventually you're going to balance it correctly. Number 2, and really the way Apologia organizes it, number 2 will play a bigger factor in Module 7 than in Module 6, but I wanted to go ahead and introduce it. Number 2 says groups of atoms that appear the same on both sides. That means in the reactants and in the products, they're grouped together. They don't split up. They can be balanced as a group. Okay, I think that'll make more sense in the examples I give in my second video. But for right now, just know if a group of atoms appears on one side and appears on the other, and the group is not broken up, it can be balanced as an entire group instead of as individual atoms. Third, this is one you don't often hear unless your teacher or something tells it to you. Balance hydrogen and oxygen last. Okay, usually those two are the hardest to balance because they appear multiple times. There's not just one hydrogen in the reactants and one in the products. You'll see it appear 2 or 3 times, sometimes even 4 across the equation. Same thing with oxygen. So really, when you're choosing, back up at the top, balance one element at a time, don't choose H and O to start with. Okay? Choose something else. Because a lot of times, if you will balance the other elements, H and O will naturally work themselves out and be balanced by the time you get to the end. So balance H and O last, or anything that appears more than 2 times. Okay, so most elements are going to appear 2 times, once in the reactants and once in the products. If they appear, say, once in the reactants and twice in the products, they are going to be harder to balance because there's going to be 2 or 3 sets of them. All right, so if it appears more than 2 times, save that one to last and see if it doesn't just naturally work itself out. And the final thing is, if you get stuck, all right, if you're sitting there and you can't get it to work, or if you're sitting there and you need an even number, but you have an odd one and there's no way to turn it even, here's what you do. You need to double all the numbers that you have written down in your equation so far. So if you had 2 carbons, you're going to just make it 4. If you had 6 hydrogens, you're going to make it 12. Whatever it is, you're going to double all your numbers, and then you're going to start again back at the first one with balancing one at a time. Many times, if you will double them, it will take care of whatever problem you were dealing with. Okay, and then at the end, as you should have read in your book, the balanced equation should be in the lowest number ratio, lowest whole number ratio. So if you need to go back and divide by 2 at the end, that's perfectly fine. But right here, if you get stuck, if you need an odd number, if you have an odd number but you need it to be even, if you're just not getting what's going on, double everything you have written down and start again from the top. Okay, and that should help you through. So I think these will make more sense in my next video where I'll do 2 or 3 examples and walk through balancing with you. But please take the time to understand balancing equations now, because when we get to Module 7 and Module 8, they're going to assume you can do it, and then they're going to give you math problems on top of it. So if you balance it wrong, then you're working with the wrong numbers in your math problems. So you're going to end up missing very large amounts of problems because you can't balance the equation. So really take the time to balance them. I'll be sending home, or I'll be emailing out a practice sheet that has even more practice for balancing equations on it, because I cannot overemphasize this enough. Plus, this is one of those things kind of like electron configurations. Once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy, but you need to do a few practice ones to understand the patterns and to see the best way to think about balancing the reactions. So hopefully you've got these written down and you're ready to look at some example problems, which will be the next video.